press event or something like that. And Suzanne used the word celebration as something that we should really term this event. And I like that, because this is what it is. This is a celebration. I'm really happy, and thanks for coming. I'm real excited about this. I'm glad you're all here. But I do believe this is a turning point, and that's why we're here to celebrate. I coordinated this production of this manual, and that's another reason I'm celebrating. It was a lot of work. I'm really glad it's done and finally out. The fun part comes now. But I work on the bicycle end of that spectrum that Suzanne described is what the Public Health Department does. Work on a lot of pedestrian plans and bicycle plans and various types of street design. And over the years, my colleagues and I continually, and many of them are in the room here, continually run into some of the same barriers that we've had. We're told that you can't do this because this manual says that, and there's some other standards that says this, and you can't do that. And, you know, we're just trying to create livable communities that are healthy, that are sustainable and all that, and we keep running into these manuals. And this came to light a little bit more for me this week. I just got back last night from Vancouver. I was at the International Walk 21 conference where Gordon Price spoke. And if you've ever heard Gordon Price, he's really a genius. He was on the council, city council for a while, and he's also a university professor. But he talks about Vancouver's development in the cities and how cities develop and so forth. He's a great speaker. But one of the points he showed pictures of Detroit in the I think it was around 1915 or so, with buses and cars in the street and lots of people on the sidewalks. And the people were randomly crossing the street at any time, in any place. And they all coexisted. And he talked about how, as time went on, shortly after that point, some decision was made that people should be regulated, that pedestrians need to be regulated. And about that time, there was an organization called Institute of Traffic Engineers. Rock can correct me if the account of the story is right. It's now transportation engineers, which is a much better term for them. But about that time, they came out with a manual that said that pedestrians should only cross at certain places at certain times, and that we needed to keep things out of the way of the cars. And that was really a turning point in the way our streets have been designed since then. And that's why we keep running up against these standards and manuals. That's kind of the start of it. There's been a lot of manuals and standards that have come out since then that have kind of reinforced that notion that the streets belong to the cars and everybody else should kind of get out of the way of the cars, and we need to move them really fast and a lot of them. And that has flown in the face of a lot of these other community and local and global objectives that we're trying to deal with. So, a number of my colleagues across the country who've been doing the same kind of work that I have for a while have kind of came to the same conclusion about the same time as that, okay, let's get in and change the manuals. Let's do a new manual. Let's do it different. Let's do a manual based on the principles of planning for people, of environmental sustainability, of livability, of health, and many other objectives that we've got. But what current manuals are giving us, streets that they forgot about people that might want to ride a bike on this street. We don't accommodate buses well, and is that a place you want to be? Is this the kind of place that you want to go on vacation? Is this the kind of place you want to stop or shop in, or the kind of place you want to spend your Saturday afternoon in, or Saturday evening? This is a street that is difficult to cross. If there's a store on one side, you want to get to the store on the other side of the street, you may have to walk a half mile down the street to the nearest traffic signal and cross, and then a half mile back. You're probably going to get in your car and drive. But the manuals gave us this. The standards gave us this street. It said that this classification of street is probably a major arterial, has to be so many lanes wide, that each of those lanes has to be so wide, the curb returns have to be so big, and we can only space signals every so often. And so all of the DNA of our streets, and in turn, half of the DNA of our urban form is in these manuals and standards. they gave us this. Again, a really enormously wide street that is what I call it, it's a dead street. You notice that this manual is called Design Manual for Living Streets, which is a term we're using now, and you can see what we mean by the opposite. This is a dead street. There is no life on this street, and this is not the kind of place we want to live or visit or bring, when your friends from New York or France come to town. Is this the kind of place you're going to show them? Probably not. These manuals also are partially responsible for giving us climate change, air pollution, traffic deaths, obesity, dependence on non-renewable energy and all of the things that go along with that, neighborhoods without any identity, this kind of generica from suburbia and all that, and we could enlarge this list as well. So, we really, I didn't feel the least bit sort of guilty about taking this on. I mean, I really thought it was something that we ought to do. Street manuals can do something different. They can give us, well, not exactly Barcelona, but something like, we also need, here's the architecture. That's a piece of it as well. Land use is the other half of the community DNA, and that's one of the things that Barcelona did well. But this is a lively street. This is a living street. This is what we can try to do. Or even Westwood Boulevard. A street where there's people out. A place for people where people want to be. A place where people want to walk. Or even some other place where people like to be. A place to shop, a place to meet other people, a place that's enjoyable, a place where there's life on the street, or something like this where we've got sustainable wastewater or stormwater management where the water soaks down into the ground through pervious concrete, bioswales, and some other techniques. So, I mentioned the disciplines of the people who came to put the charrette together, and there we are at the charrette on March 14th and 15th of this year. How many people came to the public readout we had that night? Okay, some of you. So this is the product of that two-day charrette. And again, some really good local stars, some of which we're going to introduce here tonight. We had a long list of national, state, and local organizations as well participate. I won't read all of these off, but I mean, you can see them. AARP, a really big organization with 50 million members, that represent older adults. Congress for the New Urbanism, Smart Growth America, American Institute of Architects, American Society of Landscape Architects, some really key national organizations and really key local organizations that all have an interest in designing our streets the way we're talking about. These people are going to help get the manual out. So anyhow, we started with the first chapter, which was a really key part of this, and Rock Miller played a big part in writing this chapter on the legal standing of street manuals. The Ashto Green Book, the California Highway Design Manual, MUTCD, and some of these other, there's a lot of confusion among cities as to when they're supposed to apply which of these. And there's a really overly sort of blown out of proportion concern about liability and a misunderstanding about liability. So in this chapter, we described what you can do, when you can establish your own standards, when you have to use MUTCD, when you have to use AASHTO, and when there's flexibility. The bottom line is cities have a large degree of latitude to design their own, to create their own standards. And a lot of the ideas are in this manual that cities can adopt. So this kind of turns that all around. What's the vision? We want equity. We want streets designed for people of all ages and people using all transportation modes. We want to connect our streets with traffic calming and pedestrian-oriented design. We want to connect people. We want to make places where people can meet and gather and meet other new people. We want to have local people involved in designing their own streets. This isn't just something a few people should do like we've always done in the past. We want inviting streets. We want streets that are good for commerce. We want to strengthen and enhance neighborhoods, encourage active lifestyles. We want sustainable, environmental sustainable streets, and we want streets that vary in character by neighborhood, density, and function. And these are sort of the 10 tenets that we developed as living streets, tenets in the Living Streets LA group that we had. So this is the vision, and these are the principles that the manual is based upon. So there's again, our living street. We've got a chapter on street networks and how important it is to have interconnected blocks and small blocks, and how you can sort of design the blocks. We've got new street typologies developed for different types of streets and what those streets look like in different contexts. We do have a good chapter on travelway design, and this is what is typically in your street standards. But we kind of took all of the elements of the travelway design and said, okay, how can we do the cross-section that meets these goals? We've got a chapter on intersection design, and everything from tightening up the intersection to roundabouts and use of traffic circles and mini circles. A chapter on universal access, making sure that people of all, again, physical abilities are able to get around. And that's a lot of detail on sidewalk design, how a sidewalk should be designed in different contexts. Pedestrian crossings, another chapter on this, a really important part of living streets. A special chapter on bikeway design. We have our sort of our typical bike lanes and bike paths, but we've also got some of the more exotic bikeways that we're doing now with bike boulevards and cycle tracks and some other things in here. We've got a chapter on transit accommodation, making sure that buses and so forth are well accommodated in the streets, and there's links between pedestrians and the buses. A whole chapter on traffic calming, what sort of measures you use, where and when to use them, and when they're inappropriate. And here's our chapter on streetscape ecosystem. This is, again, where we're looking at street water management and the whole issue of letting the water percolate down. All of the techniques are in there, as well as some other things about streetscape design and making the streets lively with furniture and all of that. A whole chapter on replacing streets. Thinking of streets not as just conduits for moving vehicles, but as public space, and how you can best utilize them as public space and make them sort of blossom as public space. Designing land use along living streets. How do the streets relate to the land use, the adjacent land use? And how should the adjacent land use sort of be treated architecturally? A real important piece there. A chapter on retrofitting suburbia. So we've got these great ideas. What do we do when we're stuck with something that's already built up? Well, there are ways of retrofitting. And so everything from the streets and intersections to connecting streets, and even in the case of this graphic here, redoing the neighborhood altogether, like taking, for example, an old shopping center completely down and rebuilding with a network of streets with neighborhoods. Could be some more retail, but as well as residential and some others. Last, a chapter on community engagement to show, again, the sort of the old way of designing streets was, and if you do public input, you design the streets and you bring it to the public and you say, here it is, what do you think? But we're saying, no, don't do it that way. Have the public, your stakeholders involved early on. Have them on the maps, on the diagrams, and actively involved in part of the design, and they'll buy off on it. And then we think about adoption. This manual, and Madeline's going to talk in a moment here about how it's available, but it's available online for any city or any body to download. And we hope that cities across LA County, across the country, and based on this conference I gave yesterday, even there's international interest in this manual, will download it, use it as a template. It's at modelstreetdesignmanual.com. As of this morning, it's up. But it can be customized, you can add to it, you can take chapters out that you don't want, but it is a template that cities across the country will use, and I'm confident of that. And that's part of why I'm so excited. Those national organizations that we had involved are part of our distribution strategy. And they are already actively involved in getting the manual out, and they're really going to be very helpful. And we've got a lot of others that are going to help get it out. We're speaking at conferences, we're doing articles in journals, we're doing press releases. We already had today's Atlantic magazine online had a really nice article about it. And so this manual is going to get out far and wide. And yesterday I gave a presentation at the Vancouver conference, extremely well received by an international